My name is Jason Schreiber. I'm principal with Nelson Nygaard Consulting out of Boston. We're working on behalf of the City of Concord to help solve the parking problem. Many folks perceive the parking problem differently, and we know that down the road we might be able to recommend a number of technologies and solutions to help make the parking situation a little bit easier, both for permanent residents and employees who work in downtown, as well as outsiders who commute in or are trying to shop in Concord shops. And some of those solutions can be as simple as better signs. There's better technologies in how they're displayed and how they're integrated into a system that makes sense, both for people driving as well as on foot. Sometimes there's real availability information to know in advance whether you can find a space in the Durgan garage or not. And then we can link that utilization information to how the parking system itself is run. At a basic level, a lot of the pay stations in downtown can be a little bit smarter, give a little bit of feedback on where spaces might be available. Possibly also provide differential pricing. Maybe it's a little bit more expensive on a busy main street during a busy time of day, and places like Free Street where it might need to be no parking pricing at all should be done soon. Stars is another street where it may cost too much to park. So we can start to use technology to moderate the pricing in certain areas so that it's more responsive to demand. Eventually, someday, you can overlay smarter technologies on those pay stations. Payment by cell phone, paying things in advance over the web, having information through websites provided by a downtown merchant or the city to know where to go to find the parking at the right price that suits your needs. Someday in the future, you don't need a lot of these technologies. They'll wind up in smartphones and things like paying by your car's GPS tag and what have you. But that's ways down the road. We're going to try to be as practical as simple technology solutions at the beginning of this for the next few years.
How can people get involved and voice their opinion?
Opinion is very important to this type of study. We can only collect so much live information, so much data from all of our counts and our surveys as we can in the few months that we're really working on this. The folks in town who have been living here and working this for years longer are the best source of information. We want them to weigh in, provide their feedback. We've already heard a lot here tonight at the open house, and there's a survey online now that can be accessed straight through the city's own website or through its Facebook page. Go take the survey. Tell us your parking preferences. Tell us what your experiences in downtown are. Tell all of your friends and family and coworkers about it. The more of that information we can get, the better it paints our recommendations and helps us tailor the best answers. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Again, Jason Schreiber with Nelson Nygaard. And I won't do this for very long because a lot of the information that we've got here we actually have displayed around the room, or it's been on the slideshows that are rotating, but I thought I'd just give you a little bit of an orientation to what it's all about. This simple slide sums up what tonight is all about, and it's really important to this kind of a parking study. We're not really interested in just pulling in the data, and there's data you'll see, but we're much more interested in being able to understand the patterns of use and why people do things the way they do when they search for parking or hunt for parking. So all the exercises we're going through here tonight are very, very important. Besides sticky dot and mapping exercises, there's the wall of shame where you can go put your greatest comments if you want, of course. We've got information on the boards up front. I know there was a quick survey when you came in, but the online survey is going to be available as of, I think, today or tonight.
And that table right there.
And so it's active there. It's already online right there at that table. So if you haven't had a chance to fill out the survey, do so. All that gives us a sense of what people's priorities and interests are in using the parking system. It's what helps guide our work and where we go. Because we're only in town long enough to really get a snippet of time, a snapshot of a few months, but all of you have lived here for years and will hopefully continue to engage with the system. So there's a number of steps that we have to go through in this type of a process. And the hardest one was defining a study area that we could count for a reasonable amount of effort. And this study area encompasses all of the downtown commercial core. It goes out to the northwest to the law school. It runs past the federal courthouse and down into the neighborhoods to the south, right behind the Capitol Center. here down to the river. And it essentially was designed to try to encompass where we've been told before we walked in the door where everybody is having problems with parking, plus going further into the neighborhoods to see if it was spilling into the neighborhoods and how much and to what extent. And we came into this with some basic needs, and this summarizes them quickly, that we were trying to address. Which, first and foremost, a couple of the goals at the top were right up front in what we had to respond to as professional consultants. The parking fund needs to be stabilized. We want to be able to use that for the future. How do we best make that happen, especially given that the city in recent years has invested in new technologies, the Capitol Commons garage? How do we make the system work for the next 15, 20 years or longer? But at the same time, making sure there's enough spaces for economic development to happen, for businesses to be able to come in and grow and expand. And a lot of these other things we've really heard through speaking with stakeholders, including folks like Matt at the city. You know, we got to be able to get businesses, customers in, turnover, availability at the front door. Got to make it easier for folks to know how to get around, whether they're in the car or on their foot, to get to their destinations, even out of a parking garage, or to even know the name of a parking garage or where it is. And maybe we can use technology to make the enforcement process, even the payment process, work better. We want to think about how we might be able to refine the parking structure. There's places, the parking payment structures, there's places where there's meters that people are just simply not using. It may be time to take away some of the requests for payment, but in other places, there's so much demand, we could certainly charge more. So we need to figure out what the right balance of that is. And of course, the city is interested, as they've told us and everybody we've met with, they're ready to start anew and make the system work well. So how do we set up the right level of management and organization for the city itself going forward? So we've already marched through a lot of things about existing data and utilization. I'll walk through these maps only quickly because they've been up. We're going to be looking at how it is to walk around. We're going to be looking at how land uses interface with all this, what the actual needs are for the garages, and ultimately, you know, how much to pay for parking is important. We've got the user survey that's now live in addition to the open house and the interviews that we've already done to date. It's going to be a website that hosts all that information. I think you can find that now already. And in the end, we're going to be trying to work on strategies after we get all this feedback through the survey. The survey is going to be up for at least another month, if not a lot longer, to be able to get as much data as we can from folks. And ultimately, we'll be talking about a draft and final parking management plan as the winter develops. We've got another round of data collection counting cars when the legislature is back in session, actually, in the new year. So the counting of cars thing has taken place on this large inventory data set. So this is our study area. There's nearly 10,000 parking spaces in there. We counted everything: on, off-street, public, private, everything except for small little residential driveways, to figure out what was out there and how it was being used. We have it broken down by all the various different regulations, and this is, for instance, all the on-street regulations and all the blocks and block faces where each and every piece of signing changes to a different regulation. We've looked at all the surface lots and the garage spaces. Half of that 10,000, half of that parking supply is entirely in private sector hands, and particularly in off-street parking lots. And you'll see as we get into utilization data, those are by far the greatest available assets for parking. One of the best solutions that communities have implemented is how to share that better, and it's something we'll be thinking about as we go forward. These are the utilization maps that you've seen rotating. If you haven't looked at them, I'll briefly explain them, but we went out and counted cars in these 2-hour blocks throughout the course of the day. There's a chart here, and you'll see as I march through, it goes across the hours of the day. Those are the empty spaces, those are the full spaces. That's in the entirety, all those spaces. The specifics of what's empty and full is shown on the map. Where it's a little bit red, it's a little bit busier, in this case on street, or in these parking lots early in the morning. Where it's green, we consider that sort of the ideal utilization, between 80 and 90%. This is a facility that you can find parking in, or a block face where you find a space, but it's not all empty and it's not completely full. And below that, we have grades of color that continue down to the blues and the cools that pretty much are saying, well, there might be up to half of the parking used here in the shopping mall, even at 8 a.m., and we have the specific numbers behind this, but from this mapping exercise, it's saying there's tons of parking still available. And of course there's tons of parking available there first thing in the morning. We'll progress throughout the day. This is 10 to 12 noon, late morning, and you can see that there's more activity in the downtown. There's more places that are hitting green. There's a few more of these reds in particular along Main Street. You'll see it in some of the lots here and there. As we get to that noon hour, early afternoon, you certainly see that happening a lot more. And this is on a typical weekday. We counted a normal Thursday with normal activity throughout the course of the day. As you start to get into the afternoon, you see a sense of relief. Some of those red blocks begin to start to go away. And by 4 in the afternoon, you begin to see a lot more of the cooler activity. There's still a lot of activity on Main Street. As you get towards the evening hours, Main Street is busy. There's a few blocks near it that are busy. The predominant theme on all of these maps is that everything off of that Main Street core, for the most part, has capacity in it. It's not all public parking. A lot of it is private parking. Some of it's on street, some of it's off street. And we're trying to figure out what the best balance is for these spaces. We even went into late in the evening to figure out what was going on along the Main Street core. And you can find parking, but there's places along Main Street where you cannot. And that's a perception thing. You can go right around the corner and find a space, but a lot of people feel frustrated with finding parking in downtown when the space right there outside the pub they want to go to is absolutely not there any night they try. This is a quick summary chart of all that, and I won't walk through it, but we did point out that on-street and off-street patterns are very, very similar. And because we now have a database with all this information, based on your input, we're going to start slicing it and dicing it. We've heard residents' complaints, so we'll be able to look at residential spaces. We've heard concerns about certain block faces, and we'll be able to look specifically at those. So you're helping to guide what charts we make and what maps we make, and understand, for instance, in the Main Street core, how is it performing throughout the course of the day? Where are the hotspot problems? Up and down here, there's always spaces. There's always a couple hundred spaces available within a block of Main Street throughout the course of a normal weekday. But that's not true when you start to zoom in some of the core areas. So that's part of our next exercise as we go forward. But overall, this gives us an opportunity. It says there is parking out there, even at the worst of the worst of the worst. Just where is it? Who owns it? And how do we get people to go to it? Is it in the garages? The garages have capacity, for instance. These are the Durgan Firehouse and Capitol Commons shown here. And it turns out there's both capacity in the reserved spaces as well as in the metered public spaces. Sometimes you drive into these garages and you don't feel that way because the first thing you see is reserved spaces and you have to circle up as somebody from the outside. But is it more an issue of supply, or is it how are we managing the facility that we need to solve? We also counted on a weekend. This is a Saturday. The farmer's market was busy in the morning, so there were some closed spaces. We got to lunchtime, and it was still closed. You can see the activity that along Main Street is very busy, but noticed in particular on these maps, everything off of Main Street is not busy. We had lots of people say, oh, Saturday is a mess. And on Main Street, it is a mess. It is more of a mess on Main Street on a Saturday than it is on a weekday. But off of Main Street, it's wide open. And that's what these charts show you. There's no less than 7,000 empty spaces in downtown on a Saturday. That is not a parking problem. It is a parking problem on Main Street. Saturday, early in the afternoon, again, you can see these evolve. And there's spots here and there. You'll find spots at different times of day. And in the end, there may be little small areas that are consistent problems, and we'll start to try to harvest that information and begin to understand it. But this overall picture says, if there's this much capacity in the system, how can we figure out ways to unlock it? On or off street, in Main Street, again, this kind of capacity exists in the system. The public garages on Saturdays are potentially great resources. Great resources. Look at all that space that's available. Do we all know where they are? Does the outsider who's trying to shop and visit a business trying to survive in Concord know where these spaces exist? As we start to look into things, we'll begin to realize that maybe they just don't have the right signs. Maybe there isn't the right information for an employer to give to their potential customers. We're also, next steps, going to try to understand the use of all of the buildings in downtown, how they have their particular unique demand profiles and overlap that with the utilization. So what we're starting to do is build a land use database and begin to understand how people park. And this is charts, hypothetical charts, based on national data that show parking accumulation, in this case it's in an office building, from 6 a.m. to about 6 p.m. The problem is oftentimes we create a parking lot for that office building that is a little bit bigger, and then we lock it up throughout all hours of the day. And sometimes that's a very traditional practice. It's certainly done in lots of parking codes. It's done in our mental map. That's the parking for Walgreens. But the real use of parking is more like a curve. Some others are a little bit different. You know, a restaurant may have a peak in the middle of the day, but there's lots of peaks and valleys throughout the day. We don't necessarily want to lock up its parking all day long. Residential. Your downtown has such a dearth of residential with an opposite curve like this, we could probably bring in lots of residential spaces if we could share a lot of that parking asset out there. And the real key is, and this is hypothetical, as you stack up those actual curves, you can use a lot less parking than if we lock it up for each and every individual use. And given how much empty pavement you have in Concord already, based on all this data we've seen, we need to figure out a way to be smarter and more efficient with the parking supply. This is an example of a place where we worked, and we'll do this for Concord as well, where we figure out what the overall demand is, what the actual supply is, and then we try to run the real utilization curves and figure out what the delta is and match it up with the actual curves of utilization. Much like you saw earlier, we're going to be doing this here in Concord, and we'll be able to say, look, there's this much available, and what does that translate into land uses? Can we bring in even more residential than Concord has brought in? Could we bring in more office space? It's not necessarily going to be known where or how or whether there's a market for that, but you'll know that there might be potential in the system. And I'm going to guess there'll be some potential, not necessarily what you see here. And finally, I'm going to wrap up in a second here, but we have had opportunities in the last month or so to talk with a lot of other people, merchants and policymakers, developers, landowners, all the key institutions in the downtown, and this has been great, important feedback. Lots of them are saying similar themes. There's concerns about that customer and employee conflict, as I mentioned, the overall perception of availability, but again, it comes back to information and how can we make the technology work better for us? How can we make time limits work for more people? Many people think 2 hours is not enough. Many people think 30 minutes is too much. So we need to be able to figure out what is the right time limit, if any, if we should be regulating it differently with technology. Can we make enforcement friendly? Technology can make that work better. Can we manage things better when there's an event, for instance, right here, or when the legislature's in town? We have flexibility in the system. How do we make that happen? And how can we maybe incentivize the private sector to be a partner in that if all those private spaces are just as empty as the data is showing? A lot of places know that walking and biking makes it work better, and stakeholders are telling us if it was a little bit more comfortable to walk a little bit further away from Main Street, that might be part of the solution. But again, I haven't worked in a community before that has quite a huge disproportionate impact from its state legislature. Believe it or not, we spoke with them. They have a very creative parking management program. They're trying to do the absolute best thing they can, but they are a big player in town. We need to think how we can work around them. So without further ado, take the survey. It's online. There's a nice gentleman filling it out right now at the table. There's 2 computers there. You can go home. Just go to the website. And now, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. Matt's in the back. I believe, or Quinn, do you know? This is linked off of the city's page now. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you can go to which?
Also on Facebook.
It's off of the city's Facebook page.
Yeah, city's parking Facebook.
The city's parking Facebook page. Thank you. Or you can type in this long URL, but really you'll quickly find this through the Facebook page.
It's also on the handout.
And everybody has that in your hands. So you have the website in front of you. Please go there. It's really, really, really going to be valuable information down the road.
Basically the study area for the parking issue that we're dealing with. And it basically encompasses most of the downtown area, the urban areas of the city, and we go all the way up into where the law school is. You can see how it's kind of, pushed out. But this is the area where most of the metered parking is, most of the parking garages, surface parking lots are, and also most of the metered parking within the city. So we're trying to keep it in this area and asking people to come to this forum tonight and give us ideas as to what they think we need to do to make this whole thing work that much better. So basically, I'll just point out some areas: the law school, obviously, the state library, city hall, police station here, firehouse block, the Durgan parking garage, this is the federal building. This is Fruit Street, not Fruit Street, but Spring Street, South Street, Green Street, South Main, stores, and up in, as I say, the areas up in the north end. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish, is to, as I said, to get people in here to give us their thoughts on what we can do to make it easier for people to find parking and to park within this urban downtown area.
Perfect. Yeah.
All right?
Pretty much exactly what I needed.
All right.
Is there anything else you want to make sure people are aware of with like how people can maybe, because this isn't the only night people can submit their feedback. Is there any other way?
I'm sure there'll be some other hearings in public venues before we actually finalize this. I think this is almost all going to be done here within the rest of this year and probably a little bit into 2015, and then they will come back probably sometime in the late winter, early spring with their recommendations, and then we'll sit in earnest and sit down and as a council and as a community, we'll look at all the facts and the figures that they have gathered and try to make some sense of it all and make this plan work for everybody.
So it's not so much more of a parking issue with the garages; it's more so of just on-street parking.
Well, on-street and garages. I mean, we're just trying to, maybe we're not doing the right thing with parking garages. Maybe we're not doing the right things with some of our surface lots as far as the times that, you can use them. Like, as it stands right now, most of the parking garages after 5 o'clock at night are free until 8 o'clock the following morning. We may find that we might want to, make them free, but after 6 or 7 o'clock. Main Street, on-street parking, how we're going to pay for that? What kind of timeline? We're going to have metered parking on Saturday. Are we going to extend the hours beyond 5 o'clock for metered parking? So there's all kinds of things like that. And then again, the neighborhood parking issues, where, like with the law school, it's a good possibility we might look into permitted parking for residents and go back to having areas here that are timed for parking, say 2 hours, 3 hours. And that frees up parking spots and doesn't let these people park here for a whole day. But the neighborhood people can, because they have a permit. They live there and they have to be able to use those streets, in their neighborhood.
With the Red River Garage, was that built in hopes to alleviate some of these issues?
No, that was primarily to help do the work that's been done over there on the new buildings, Capitol Commons, the Smile Building, and the Love Building. But it was also to help downtown merchants get people to be able to have more parking availability in the downtown area, and that was built in conjunction with the Capitol Commons building, and that was again to help mitigate some of the Main Street parking issues. And I think it's been somewhat successful, but as we go through this process, we may find that there's some things we can do to make it better.
So, what are they ultimately? I'm sure this is why everyone's here, is to figure out how to fix it. But it's a matter of signage, or
I think it's a lot of it's signage. We're going to have a package moving forward with our Main Street project, where we're going to have signage showing where the garages are. We're going to have I can't think of the term they use, on the Main Street, for people to be able to see where buildings are, and like the State House, the State Library, the Historical Society, the old Abbott and Downing factory down here a little ways, and that stuff. So the way signage, basically, to tell people where things are, and have signage for parking garages, surface parking lots, and things like that, so people will be able to find their way around.
So not only are you guys getting input by having people actually draw on the maps, but I also noticed you had some easels over here as well, right?
Things like people can pick up dots over here, the red dots, and they can place the dots on the things that they think are important. And that will give these gentlemen from the consulting firm some input and some understanding what people are thinking, and then they go forward. This is what they do for a living, and this is what they do, 5 days a week, however many days in the year that they work.
Yeah.
So they're the experts, and
And what better people to ask than the residents of Concord, correct?
absolutely, it's this. It's this area is our city, and it's important that everyone, whether they live in the downtown area or the outskirts of the community and the outlying areas, that that they get involved in this so that we can make this community better for everyone.
All right.